Hello, everybody, and welcome to Project HR, a podcast dedicated to building better workplaces. Project HR is brought to you by Projections, North America's leading provider of employee communication resources, including video, websites, e-learning, social media, and virtual events to help you connect with your team. For more information, you can visit us online at projectionsinc.com. I am Jennifer Orqua, COO of Projections, and your host for today's episode of Project HR. Now, mentor training is often viewed as a feel-good effort because it's such a supportive thing, leaders sharing knowledge and lifting up less seasoned workers with the wisdom of their experience. What can get lost in these discussions is the real positive impact that mentor training can have on a company's bottom line. One notable study addressing this issue, highlighted by the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania and conducted by Gartner, found that the employees that participated in a mentorship program, both mentors and mentees alike, were more likely to be promoted or to receive salary increases, and they were more likely to remain with their employer long term. Joining us today to talk about all the different ways a mentor training program can impact your company's ROI is Sarah Scala. She is the founder and principal consultant of Sarah Scala Consulting and is an old friend of Project HR. You may remember her from last season's episode on emotional intelligence. Sarah, thanks so much for joining us again on the program.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So, Sarah, you've spent a good part of your career working in mentor program design. Is that right?
Yeah, I've been designing mentor programs for organizations for over 15 years. I'm also a mentor to a few others, and I have 7 mentors myself.
Oh, wow. So can you tell us about the different kinds of mentoring that are out there?
Yeah, there's a few that I use when I'm working with an organization. Primarily, the projects that I'm designing are either formal or informal mentor programs, although there's also peer mentoring that some organizations want to take advantage of.
Interesting. All right. So let's talk about the benefits of mentorship for our listeners. Above and beyond just like the dollars and cents of it, why is this a practice we should all be engaged in?
Mentor programs provide benefits to both the individual employee as well as the organization. These can include immersion into a new culture for a new hire, reducing turnover, stronger retention, succession, leadership development, knowledge sharing, becoming more aware of the culture, and it's often produces quicker or stronger skill mastery.
Interesting. So the real question is how do all those great things translate into a positive ROI for a company?
So ROI typically is measured using some metrics, and mentoring is important with that because when you're designing a program, especially a formal program, typically you will have defined objectives, defined budget, KPIs, and with those it becomes easy to measure the impact. Has there been a reduction in turnover? Is there faster skill mastery? Where are people in terms of their engagement and their retention? And these metrics are often being measured already by human resources or finance or organizations. And that's how we're able to transfer the impact of a mentor program that's designed well to a positive return on investment.
So mentor programs are really a must-have for companies where their employees have a very specific skill set. Is that right?
Yeah, I would completely agree. It's key for very specific skills. An example I can share with you is a mentor program I designed a few years ago for Simon Pierce. Simon Pierce is up in Vermont. They are a custom hand-blown glass company, and it was taking a year and a half for their new apprentices to become master glass blowers at that level. I was
Mm-hmm.
brought in because they wanted a way to help these new apprentices become more proficient and efficient with how they blew glass and made their product. And so I designed Simon Pierce's apprenticeship program, which included training for their master glass blowers on how to teach and develop others. So sort of a train the trainer. It also included assessments, but there were also compensation incentives that were brought into this program because glass blowers at Simon Pierce are paid by piece. Now, if I'm going to ask a 25-year experienced glass blower, not 25 years in age, but 25 years making hand-blown glass to stop their production in order to teach someone else, I'm going to penalize them with their compensation because they can't make as many pieces. And so I worked with HR and the compensation team to design compensation incentives that would help the master glass blower make even more when they serve as a mentor to the apprentices. And so the result from that program was reduction of mastery time by 33%. If we're looking at return on investment, it was huge because what used to take a year and a half now only took a year.
So, beyond skilled trades, mentor programs are also really a critical part of leadership succession planning. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. When I design succession plans for any organization, putting high potentials or executives with mentors is key. Even if we need to look for mentors outside of the organization. For example, a CFO or a CEO may not have a person in house that would be the most effective mentor. Maybe it's a member of a board, maybe it's a member of another organization that might be the best match for mentoring, but absolutely, especially for leadership and succession.
So, can mentor programs, coaches work in smaller companies, or is this really just only for large organizations?
Mentor programs actually work well in companies of any size. A larger company will need more resources to support it, systems, staff, and resources, where smaller companies can usually manage it in house with human resources or
Hmm.
folks in the learning and development department.
Okay. All right, Sarah, we're going to take a quick sponsorship break right now. But when we return, we want to explain the basics of high impact mentor program design. So stay with us.
Hi, thanks for listening. And also thanks to Proofbox for supporting this week's episode of Project HR. Proofbox is like Netflix for labor relations. Every video, every resource immediately at your fingertips. Instantly stream the employee communication titles you need and allow members of your leadership team to do the same. Learn more at unionproof.com/proofbox.
And we're back with Sarah Scala, the founder and principal consultant of Sarah Scala Consulting. And Sarah, now since we're talking dollars and cents, how expensive is it for a company to start a mentor training program?
That's a great question. Depending on the design of the mentor program, it can be different in terms of expense or investment. Informal mentor programs are often free or very inexpensive to design and manage, where formal mentor programs often have expense because they often need staff to manage it, money for training of mentors and mentees. Sometimes, if it's incentivized, for example, with glass blowers, money figured into compensation or bonus, systems to match and evaluate. And it really depends on the number of participants, the objectives, and the goals, as well as the length of time. So some mentor programs are as small as 30 days, where others may last an entire year or more, which would definitely have an impact on possible investment dollars.
Yeah, for sure. So if a company doesn't currently have a mentor training program in place, what are the first steps to building one?
Whenever an organization reaches out to me with interest in a mentor program, the first question I ask is why? What is the objective? What is the purpose? And
Mm-hmm.
because if we don't have an objective and we're not specific, we don't have the right target. Defining that specific need is critical to get stakeholder support. Whether it's informal and you simply want verbal support from stakeholders, or a formal program where you need stakeholder support to allocate resources, budget, headcount. Starting with the objective and the business need first is the best step.
So should the goals of a mentorship program that you alluded to be primarily driven by the overall goals of the company, or is this more something that's geared toward the individual career goals of the person being mentored?
It depends. I've worked for companies that use a 70-20-10 development planning process where the 20 stands for 20% of individual development um, being focused on either partnering with a coach or a mentor. But many of my clients have hired me to build mentor programs that support the specific organizational need. A reduction in turnover in a specific division, for example, building specialized skills, immersion into the culture, advanced development for high potentials, or as part of succession. So it really depends on what is the need, which would determine is it a program designed for individual career goals versus the overall company.
So, Sarah, I want to go back to the idea of goals and figuring out what those are at the beginning. Do both company goals and individual goals contribute to that return on investment?
I think both can certainly provide a strong return on investment. I think it's a bit more difficult, or it may be more difficult, to measure a mentor program designed to support an individual versus an organization. However, many companies, for example, the one I work for that had a 70-20-10
Mm,
program for development planning, it was baked into the human resource information system. And so as we did updates and meetings on our development and things like that, there is data in the system that can be used as part of those metrics as well.
So let's talk about program structure. Is there a particular structure that all mentor programs should follow, or is this something that really needs to be customized for each company?
I get asked that question a lot, and I have found, as have my clients, that customized structure is best to meet the culture and the objectives of each organization. For example, I built a mentor program to reduce turnover for frontline staff in the financial industry, which was very different from the mentor program I built for Simon Pierce Master Glass Blowers. And so, whenever I design a mentor program, the client always recommends it be custom. How is it going to fit their culture?
Hmm.
How will it
Hmm.
meet their objectives? How are we going to measure it? There are some best practices, especially for formal mentor programs, again, that involve often training the mentors, having stakeholders, having evaluation processes set up. But
Hmm.
but the first, thing to look at is what is the culture and what are the objectives.
So, how long do mentor programs typically last?
So some of them that I've built have been 30 to 90 days, more for new hire immersion, and especially for high potentials and executives, those typically last at least a year.
So, how do you determine who those participants are? How do you develop that program?
The first thing is to start with the mentees. Who are the participants that we are targeting the mentor program for? Once that's defined, then the organization needs to look at who could support those specific needs.
Okay. So, what kind of process is there for training mentors?
Depending on the objectives and the program design, both the mentor and the mentee may receive some training. If skill development is the role of the mentor, they're often trained on how to teach others, observe, explain, give feedback, for example. And that often will cross over if it's interpersonal or leadership development as well.
Mm.
Sometimes when I design mentor programs, the mentor training is very simply similar to a train the trainer program, where
Hmm.
there are those pieces of educating others that are important for a mentor to be aware of as well.
So, when you're selecting mentors, have you ever had experience where they push back? We did an episode a while back on imposter syndrome. So, I'm wondering if that ever plays out in the development of a mentor program where your mentors feel like they're not qualified or something along those lines.
Great question. When mentors feel like they're not the right fit, that's when a conversation needs to be had to help understand the purpose of it, why they've been selected. It really is helpful. And as I mentioned earlier, the best first step is to set objectives and get stakeholder buy in. When you have really strong buy in from stakeholders aren't afraid to promote it or publicize
Mm.
it or
Hmm.
encourage participation as a mentor as far as an opportunity, a leadership development opportunity, and a way to give back or to help others become stronger. So when there is extreme pushback, then they may not be the right fit to be the mentor.
Hmm.
However, often helping them understand what a huge opportunity it is to be
Hmm.
a mentor has been pretty critical. However, when a mentor and a mentee are selected and matched up, if it's not a good fit, research has shown it should be ended right away, no hard feelings, and just partner the mentee with someone else that might be a better fit.
And so, on that note, at the other end of things, how do we go about evaluating the success of a mentorship program? What kinds of metrics can we use?
Based off the objectives, success can be measured financially or in terms of sales, turnover, by focus groups, evaluations, or surveys. I often suggest, especially for shorter term mentor programs like a 30 to 90 day, that the evaluations take place at 30, 60, and 90 as a pulse check. I don't think it's something that's at the end and done, because especially when it's a pilot program or it's new, those in learning and development or human resources or whatever team have designed it don't want to wait a year to find out if any
Sure.
tweaks
Yeah.
need to be made. So I
hmm
often suggest more evaluation versus less.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, are there different metrics for short term evaluation versus long term?
Yeah, so a 90-day program that I designed, as I mentioned, for the financial industry, we had 20% turnover of frontline staff in the financial industry. And part of the evaluation process was a 30, 60, and 90-day evaluation that was
hmm
tied to the mentor's compensation. So it was incentivized because pulling this frontline staff person from making sales or doing some of their other responsibilities would have penalized their compensation. And so, again, there were multiple pulse checks, not only to give feedback to the mentor, but also to decide, have they met the expectations? Are they doing the role of the mentor? Is it effective? And so, especially when tied to compensation, it was done at a 30, 60, and 90. And those evaluations were designed based on defined competencies for
Mm.
the mentor to exhibit and the skills that the mentee was expected to be developing. So whether it's long term or short term, if it's designed well, the original plan for the program needs to include the metrics and the evaluation process, but it should never be an afterthought. This is all in the pre-design before you
hmm
press go.
Yeah, goes back to the old start with the end in mind, right? That's perfect.
Exactly.
And what you
Exactly.
said earlier about goals as well. So Sarah, you mentioned compensation a couple of times. I want to know: do all mentors need to be compensated in order for the program to work?
Nope, they do not. And the examples that I have shared, I designed a compensation piece as part of the mentor program solely because the mentor stepping out of their production role, whether in sales or making glass products, would reduce their compensation. So no
Mm.
one would want to sign up if they knew being a mentor would mean I have to make less money. And so
Mhm.
compensating those who stepped up to take a role of a mentor and incentivizing it or compensating it made the mentor be compensated at what they would normally make or a bit more. Most
Mm.
organizations want to do it as a bit more because it makes it seem like a bigger deal, like more of an honor, more of a leadership role. But there's been other programs that I've designed for a consumer packaged goods company for their onboarding or for a consulting firm, and compensation wasn't necessary because they're not paid per piece or per
Mm,
sale.
mhm. But I could see where it would add a little prestige to the role if you were to be compensated for it. I like that.
Yep.
So, Sarah, we're going to take some time out for another quick break, and we'll be right back after this. You're listening to the Project HR podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Oraqua, and our guest today is Sarah Scala, the founder and principal consultant of Sarah Scala Consulting. We are back. And mentor programs work best, it seems, when there are plenty of candidates to go around on both sides. So, how, as a company, can you publicize a mentor program and encourage participation?
So some mentor programs, this might be a surprise, but some are confidential. They're only
Mm.
for high potential. They're not publicized. They're not advertised at all.
Hmm.
Some are automatic, maybe for part of a new hire immersion. Some programs are voluntary and as part of an effort to build the culture or to promote it as an employee benefit. So how do we promote it? If we can be vocal about it, culturally and it's appropriate, having that stakeholder buy-in at the beginning is key because they can promote it, they can show their support, whether this be in town hall meetings, email sent out to employees, shared in a newsletter.
Hmm.
Those are some ways that the stakeholders can share their support and excitement for a program like this.
So is it ever too early to start talking about the company's mentor training program, assuming it's not a confidential one? Do you talk about it in the onboarding process? Do you talk about it pre-hire?
If I were ever to interview for a corporate position in the future, and I've been the CEO of my own consulting practice now for almost 9 years, but if I were to
Sure.
ever interview in the future, that would be a question I would ask in my very first interview.
Hmm.
Generation Y, Gen Z are hungry for continued development from the start. And having effective programs like mentoring or continued development will be looked at very strongly. So if you're a hiring manager today, I would expect people to ask about mentoring as one of many possible development programs that you have available or don't, but just expect it as a question.
So talk to me a little bit about the benefits of establishing a mentor program for a company. Why should our listeners who are very often, VP of HR, that sort of role, why should they start this kind of a program at their company?
Mentor programs are a very inexpensive way to promote knowledge sharing, to build culture, to improve retention, and to upskill people,
Mhm.
employees. Definitely. There's a lot of benefits to it.
So can you share with us some examples of successful mentoring programs that really result in a strong ROI for the organization?
Yep. The first mentor program I built a number of years ago was for Kohler Credit Union in Wisconsin. The issue was 20% turnover for frontline staff, new hires within the first 90 or 120 days. And so after a needs assessment, I realized, it was a cultural issue at each location. The new hires weren't being supported when they were turned loose to go to work. And so I built a mentor program to support that. That program reduced turnover by 88% in 1 year. So if we are to
Wow.
look at metrics or, the numbers, the bottom line, that was a pretty big win. The price
Hmm.
of the entire program with compensation incentives, the price of just saving one employee from leaving would have covered
Hmm.
the entire cost of the mentor program, the compensation, the training,
Sure.
etc. Another
Yeah.
example is Simon Pierce glass blowing, and that reduced their onboarding or their skill building time by 33%. So they went from a year and a half to 1 year with being able to professionally produce this hand blown glass.
That's brilliant. So, one of the reasons, of course, that we're talking about this topic today is because your consultancy offers a program on mentor design. Can you tell us a little bit about your program and what you do?
Yeah, so I do this in a few ways. The first way that I do this is I offer to consult and design the mentor program for the organization. So many companies will hire me to come in. Often I'll partner with human resources, sometimes some finance folks, but I'll come in. I'll do the full design. Some will even have me train the mentors. Some I will design the training for the mentors and they'll do it in house. But that's one of the services that I offer. The second service is that I designed a digital mentor program design course. It's
Oh,
$199 until April 1st, and then the price will be going up, but it's 3 hours, it's self paced. And when people purchase that course, they get access to it for an entire year. So it covers some of the pieces we've talked about today, but many, many more.
nice. So, how can our listeners find out more about that? Where can we get in touch with you?
Yep. So you can find about the course at sarahscala.com/courses. Or if you want to connect with me, I'm on LinkedIn at sarahscala.com. And that's SARAHSCALA.
And I want to let our listeners know that a link to Sarah Scala Consulting's website and a direct link to the Mentor Program Design with Strong ROI page will be included in this episode's companion guide. So be sure to unlock that today at projectionsinc.com/podcast. Right now, though, Sarah, it is time for our lightning round questions. And these are questions we ask of every guest on the podcast. Are you ready?
Ready.
All right, so the first one is our topic showdown. In this episode, we've been talking about mentor programs. And as a reader of your blog and your YouTube channel, which of your interests that I've found would make you a better mentor, cycling or kayaking?
Kayaking. Earlier in my life, I taught kayaking for 10 years. Everything from being safe in the boat to flipping the boat over and rolling it back up. Yeah, awesome.
Nice. Very good. All right, so what's the best book you've read recently?
The best book I read recently was You'll Never Believe What Happened to Lacey. And this is a book that Amber Ruffin wrote with her sister, Lacey Lumar. Amber Ruffin is a writer of Seth Meyers, of his show. She now has her own show, and it's about anti-racism and social justice. But the book comes across in a way that it sometimes is actually funny. I know we shouldn't laugh about racism, but some of their stories are just crazy.
It's crazy what people do, right?
Yep.
So tell me, what is your favorite thing about helping people design mentor programs?
Results, the culture, the retention, the skill building, and advancement.
Absolutely. So what piece of general advice would you give to a new mentor?
Be patient, listen more than you speak, and if it's not the right fit for you or the mentee, end it quickly so they can find a person that's a better fit.
And how do you hope to inspire others?
I hope to inspire others every day by being my authentic self and giving back to my community.
Love that. Sarah, thanks so much for joining us today on this week's episode of Project HR.
Thank you for having me, Jennifer.
And thanks too to our listeners. And once again, this is your reminder to grab the companion guide for this episode at projectionsinc.com/podcast. If you'd like to be on Project HR or you know someone who would, feel free to email us at projecthr@projectionsinc.com. We're also on Twitter and Facebook at Projections, and you can find us on LinkedIn at Projections Inc. And last but certainly not least, make sure you never miss an episode of Project HR by subscribing to the podcast. Drop us a line, leave us a review, or simply give us a handful of stars wherever you get your content. That's it from me for now. Let's make it a great day at work.